In the 15th and 16th centuries, Spain was a complex and tumultuous nation, marked by a rich mix of religions and spiritual traditions. European Jews and Muslims had long been part of Spanish society, gradually assimilating into the expanding Spanish kingdom. However, this religious diversity came under violent attack when Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand, the Catholic monarchs, issued the Alhambra Decree in 1492. This decree banned the practice of non-Christian religions and gave the population a brief window to convert to Christianity or face expulsion. During this period, countless individuals were persecuted, exiled, or forced to convert. Amid this coercive religious transformation, new religious ideologies and spiritual movements began to emerge. Many recent converts, particularly Jews, had to abandon deeply rooted beliefs, including the mystical traditions of Judaism, and quickly adapt to the Christian order. This spiritual dislocation gave rise to Christian mystic movements that deviated from the doctrines of the Orthodox Catholic Church, struggling with the forced abandonment of their original faith. Many individuals developed unique spiritual practices as a means of coping. The result was a flourishing of religious and intellectual experimentation that contributed to a cultural and spiritual renaissance. One notable movement that arose from this era was that of the Alumbrados, the Illuminated or Enlightened. The Alhambra Decree resulted in the conversion of approximately 100,000 Jews, known as conversos. This diverse group included both the wealthy and the poor. Among them were mystics and commoners who would later be shaped by the teachings of influential leaders, offering new systems of belief in these turbulent times. For many, the late 15th century felt like the end of an era, giving way to a new age of Christian dominance. The newly unified monarchy of Isabella and Ferdinand Young. Intellectual rulers encouraged artistic and scholarly endeavors, including the translation of ancient texts. Though the kingdom enforced strict Christian orthodoxy, it occasionally tolerated spiritual and academic exploration within certain bounds. The story of the Alumbrados begins with Cardinal Cisneros, prominent figure in late 15th and early 16th century Spain. Cisneros was a wealthy statesman and churchman who made his mark early in life. After earning a degree in law, he gained recognition from Pope Pius II and worked as a legal delegate for the church. He was rewarded with a piece of property in Toledo. But when the local archbishop refused to honor the papal grant, Cisneros was imprisoned for 6 years. Refusing to relinquish his claim, he was eventually released and granted the land. However, he traded it for another estate in Sigüenza, where he found favor and was appointed vicar general under the local bishop. As the Spanish kingdom intensified efforts to convert non-Christians, the Inquisition became increasingly brutal. Cisneros, now a trusted servant of the crown, was appointed chief confessor to Queen Isabella. His influence continued to grow, and he became one of the most powerful figures in the kingdom. Though conservative and feared, he was also a patron of scholarship. As Archbishop of Toledo, Cisneros initiated significant academic and religious reforms. He founded new universities, reinforced Catholic orthodoxy, and oversaw the creation of the Polyglot Bible, which presented the Old Testament in Hebrew, Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. His scholars also produced a New Testament in Greek and Latin. In his later years, Cisneros, now around 70, organized a military campaign against the Muslims in North Africa. With support from Queen Isabella, appointed general of the church army, he personally financed the soldiers' provisions and weapons. The campaign was a swift success. His forces captured the strategic city of Oran in a single day. His biographer De Castro recorded one of Cisneros' rousing speeches from the campaign. "The Moors are ravaging our coasts. They are dragging our children into slavery. They are disgracing our wives and daughters. They are insulting the name of Christ. As for myself, I wish to be the first in facing every danger. For I have come here with the resolution to conquer or to die with you, which God forbid. After all, is there a better place for the priests of God than the battlefield, where soldiers are fighting for their country and religion? Though ruthless in his pursuit of heretics, Cisneros was revered by the people as a pious leader. He distributed portions of his wealth to the needy and engaged actively with public life. Perhaps his greatest legacy to future mystics was the religious revival he inspired. He was known to spend long hours meditating on scripture, and many scholars believe he was sympathetic to the growing mystical movements of his time. Among these were groups devoted to intense spiritual meditation, some of whom embraced hermetic lifestyles, seeking communion with God through near ecstatic experiences. The Alumbrados would ultimately emerge from these spiritual currents. Early in the 16th century, inspired by the triumphs of the Christian kingdom, these mystics grew increasingly fervent and radical. Some monks began to preach a coming golden age filled with prophecy and divine revelation. Cisneros' cousin, the abbot of the monastery at Montserrat, authored a mystical text titled Aggiursatorio della Vita Espirituale, Exercises for the Spiritual Life, promoting asceticism and spiritual discipline. According to Erica Rummel's authoritative biography, de Cisneros on the Threshold of Spain's Golden Age, Cisneros encouraged the publication of such mystical literature. He commissioned a Spanish translation of St. John Climax's Spiritual Ladder, a foundational text in Christian mysticism. In the final years of his life, Cisneros received visits from numerous mystics who believed he was leading Spain into a messianic era. The French philosopher Charles de Beauvais visited and prophesied that the Holy Land would be reclaimed within 12 years. After Cisneros' military victories in North Africa, Beauvais wrote to him, "You have taken the plow in your hand. Do not look back until the African groves are filled with the divine seed." Beauvais, like many others, saw Cisneros as a spiritual beacon ushering in a new age. Cisneros passed away in 1517, just as Spain stood on the threshold of a new age. In this spiritually charged and transformative time, the Alumbrados began to rise. Alumbrado meant illuminated or enlightened. The term was first used in a letter from Friar Antonio de Pastrana to Cisneros in 1494. Pastrana was trying to warn Cisneros of the psychedelic conversos who were practicing a strange form of Christianity. In the letter, he describes one Alumbrado he imprisoned as a contemplative religious enlightened with the darkness of Satan. It is said that this deranged practitioner was making plans to impregnate a well-respected nun to bring forth a Messiah. Cisneros was sympathetic towards the apocalyptic and prophetic Christian mystics, as he felt a deep passion for the esotericism of God's plan. The Alumbrados were protected by Cisneros until his death, after which they became vulnerable to the raging Inquisition. The Alumbrados were one of several emerging groups at the time. They were later put on trial by the Inquisition. It was said of them in the edict against the Alumbrados Toledo, 1525. "We, by divine providence, Archbishop of Seville, make it known that after our very Holy Father entrusted us with the holy office of the General Inquisition, we were informed by various people who were fearful of God and zealous for our Catholic faith, that in certain places in this Archbishopric of Toledo many people spoke and proclaimed certain words that appeared to deviate from our holy Catholic faith. Such people gather together secretly and publicly in special secret assemblies, and some call them Alumbrados." As we see, there were different names for these mystics. One of them was the Dejados, or abandoned, due to the simple and ascetic life they led. They believed in a direct and personal relationship with the Bible, cutting out the church as a mediator. Among the mystics was Melchor Cano, considered the first Alumbrado. According to John E. Longhurst's Luther's Ghost in Spain, Cano spent his youth in England, where he had a revelation that set him on a spiritual path. He later traveled to North Africa to convert Muslims to Christianity. A religious fanatic, he believed he was on a divine mission. The other friars found him outlandish. Around 1512, he publicly prophesied an apocalypse. All kings would die, Rome would be destroyed, the Pope and clergy would be decapitated, and said it would happen in less than a decade. His notoriety prompted nobles to warn Cisneros about him. Like many other mystics and Alumbrados, Cano believed the world would convert to Christianity and that the Messiah would soon return, establishing his reign in Jerusalem. As Cisneros died and the prophecies failed to materialize, Cano faded into obscurity. Still, the reformist spirit and mysticism sparked by Cisneros persisted. What made the Alumbrado movement unique among similar cultish groups of the time was that it was founded by influential women. English historian Alistair Hamilton concluded the movement began under Isabel de la Cruz. Isabel formed her teachings in Guadalajara under the patronage of Juana de Valencia, a member of the wealthy. Isabel was a Jewish Spaniard forced to convert to Christianity. The Alumbrados practiced a blend of Judaic, Christian, and philosophical beliefs. From Inquisition trial documents, we know the Alumbrados denied the existence of hell, rejected idol worship and crosses, and viewed church mass as unimportant. They believed in meditative prayer as a path to God and the rejection of materialism. De Cazzola, Isabel's close friend, described the community as people who left occupations, trades, and merchandises to recollect themselves and serve the Lord. Isabel hosted meetings at her home, building the movement's foundation. Inquisitors later called her the main teacher and dogmatizer, to whom the rest owed obedience, and whose doctrine they followed. As a girl, Isabel felt divinely called, disobeyed her mother, and moved into a seminary to become a beata female monk. She later left and led her own prayer groups. Her influence spread to universities and town women, who found empowerment in religious leadership previously reserved for clergy. Maria de Santo Domingo, also known as La Beata de Pedrejita, was another key figure. She initiated Melchor Cano into Alumbradoism and claimed direct communion with Christ, calling herself his bride. She led meditative trances and dances. Protected by Cardinal Cisneros, she was spared from the Inquisition, defending her revelations as part of a legitimate lineage of visionary women. Many characters shaped Spain's 16th-century mystical revival, including Pedro Ruiz de Alcaraz. Once a preacher for a noble family, he was drawn to Isabel's teachings. Under her guidance, he became a preacher and bookkeeper at the court of Escalona, holding meetings with local elites. When leaders like Isabel were later persecuted, the transcription of Alcaraz's trial preserved much of what we know about the movement. Followers revered Isabel and Alcaraz as saints, though they taught humility before God. They compared themselves to St. Paul, claiming a higher level of revelation than the apostles. Eventually, the whole order would be thrown into legal scrutiny when internal turmoil would turn members against each other. One of Isabel's early students and colleagues was Mari Núñez, who also worked with Isabel de la Cruz in the Valencia family palace. Together, they grew the order, procuring more women. Upon her popularity, Núñez grew intimate with a priest, Hernando Diaz, which was seen as illicit by the other members, including Isabel. She was outcasted and shamed by the group. Núñez left the group and Guadalajara with Diaz to Seville, motivated by envy and resentment. In 1519, Núñez met with the office of the Inquisition in Toledo to confess against Isabel de la Cruz and her teachings. She referred to a book that de la Cruz put together with her doctrines. However, it has never been found. Among the things she accused Isabel of was the denial of hell. The church dismissed the then vague claims against Isabel. When her popularity and influence grew extensively over the years, obviously making an impact on the people, the Church reopened the case. The Church issued what is known as the Edict of Toledo, or Edict of Faith, against the Alumbrados in 1524, outlining the charges against the broad group of mystics who fell under the category of Illuminist. Some of the accusations against the Alumbrado were the rejection of church rituals, believing that salvation didn't require the Church as intermediaries, the denouncement of idol veneration, and the preference for mental prayer over oral prayer. Isabella and Alcaraz were arrested in 1524. They faced a few trials where their cases were heard, causing different reactions. Some of the judges felt they should be tortured or burned alive. Some were more sympathetic. A well-respected theologian and scholar within the university circles of Spain, and Judge Juan de Ocheo, said of the two that it would be great nonsense to condemn the disciple and save the teacher, referring to Isabella as the teacher and Alcaraz as the disciple. Both were tried and sentenced at first to life in prison. They were later released about a decade later, but not permitted to leave their city. That was the end for the Alumbrados of Isabel and her colleagues, however. As history has shown, mystic groups would continue to rise and fall at the behest of the Inquisition. The Church became more focused on the issue of Lutheranism and the major impact it was having on the Christian world. The Church would use the term Alumbrado as a general term to attack those with Protestant tendencies. The Jesuit order would also later be attacked and accused of practicing Alumbradoism. The Edict of Faith in Seville of 1623 would later broaden the heresy of Alumbradoism to atheism, witchcraft, blasphemy, and bigamy, making it easy for the Church to seek and destroy opposing ideas and groups. The Alumbrados were but one group in a flash of time from a small area of Earth that surged past the mainstream institutional thought to catch a glimpse of a more humanitarian and esoterically inspired spiritual experience. This glimpse, however, was caught and released back into the ether from where it came.